Okay, so gonna talk today about Ted Lasso tangentially, um, but um, this week's Ted Lasso really hit me in a really, really weird place. So there's a lot going on in every episode, lots of plot lines, lots of things happening. The thing that got me about this week's episode, which kind of is why I'm doing this, which is something I've never really done before, um, is talking about the effect of divorce on a kid. Um, I don't know why I'm getting emotional. Um, when my parents divorced, I wasn't angry. I was relieved. Um, I was like 15, almost 16 years old, and gosh, my parents, raised me in a pretty loving household. I wasn't, hurting for love or attention. I was an only child. I had everything I could ever want. My GI Joe collection and other toy collection was insane growing up. So I didn't want for really anything. I certainly didn't want for food, for love, for attention. Um, all of that. It was a very, very loving household. Let me just make sure that's abundantly clear. I'm one of the lucky ones, and I realize and recognize that every day of my life. It's definitely boiled over into my relationships as an adult. It's something that affects my relationship with my wife, who I love dearly, and I'm not afraid to say it. I probably say it too often, as opposed to a lot of guys, where I think a lot of men are worried about their masculinity and being, what's the word? Open, being. I forgot that. I'm not getting the word right now, but I have no problem being sensitive. Is really what I'm trying to kind of say here. Being what's the word? I'm just not getting it. Um, but there's this part in Ted Lasso. This week's Ted Lasso just got released this morning, and there's this part where Ted is asking Rebecca, his boss, the head of the soccer club, the football club, to get a private investigator so he can investigate if the man that she's seeing, his old dentist, I think it was, is going to propose to his wife because she went with him to Paris, and so he has a son in London with him, while they're having a little romantic getaway, which is nice. I'd like to do that myself. But here's the thing. There's this wonderful part, and it's so well done. The writing on this episode, really, like every other episode, I think the last couple of episodes, like this, like the last three now episodes, have all been really, really good this season of Ted Lasso. But this one really kind of hit home in that there's this busker who's playing Ted, who's playing Hey Jude, of course, and Ted gets called away to go and answer this phone call from Rebecca, who has information on um, on the private investigator that he asked her to go ahead and hire. And the episode and the scene really is specifically about being present with your family. And here's this wonderful boy, and he's talking to Coach Beard. There's this great line. He says, "So, why do you like the Beatles?" He said, "Because my dad likes them." And that touched me. In my household, the Beatles hold a special place. Above all else, we weren't religious; we were Beatles fans. So when I think about it, this episode really kind of spoke to who cares what's happening with your wife, is what Rebecca says. You have your son there, is essentially what she says. It's not the actual line from the film, but or from the show, whatever. But here's the thing about it is that, you know, it's about taking what's important and recognizing, acknowledging what's important to you in your life, and what is what the effect of divorce has on kids. Um, you know, when my parents got divorced, I was relieved. I was happy, honestly. I'll never forget what happened. I was with my parents again. Like I said, an only child, so we used to go out and eat out a lot. Um, and they took me to Tony Roma's. I love Tony Roma's. I still wish they had them around. There's like hardly any, I guess. Certainly not in Florida where I live now. And they took me to Tony Roma's, and I sat by myself on one half of the booth, and they sat on the other. And they told me the news, and I was indifferent. It's the perfect explanation for how I was. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't emotional in any way, shape, or form. I was dead. I really was. And I was like 15, you know, almost 16 years old when this happened. So the reason I'm doing this and the reason I'm talking about this is because this episode touched me so much. Because at the end of the day, you know, divorce is horrible. We all acknowledge that. You know, two people that were in love, they no longer are, and they move on. That's heartbreaking in and of itself. Add to that fact that you're involving other parties, specifically your children, the fruits of your love, if you will, now suddenly are in the crossfire of everything, because now you don't love each other. You've fallen out of love. That might be grown apart. It might be, you know, abuse in some form or fashion. Too many to really describe or discuss here. It's no point. Something obviously went wrong. Something happened. And now suddenly, these kids are in the crossfire. They're in the middle. And how does that affect them? Now, I'll be the first to say I didn't have a strong relationship with my father. I still don't. He's, you know, 65 years old, lives in Arizona. I don't have a strong relationship with him. I really never really have. You know, he raised me. I think, you know, I'm a good person overall. My mom was the one doing the heavy lifting. There's no question about that at all when it came to raising me. And so, you know, certainly my relationship with her is stronger than it is for it is with my father. But here's the thing, you know, I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to how you act and how you react to things. Like anything else. You know, you have two different methods. You have so many options, really, that you can go when it comes down to being faced with any scenario, any situation that you could think of in life. But when you're talking about divorce, and specifically divorce when it involves children, the thing that you have to take into consideration is the effect that it has on them, because that effect is so distinct, because nothing in your life can prepare you for going from a two-parent household, a conventional nuclear family kind of thing, and then suddenly one of those people leaving. And, you know, when it happened for me, you know, it wasn't it wasn't painful. I don't think I really ever processed it, which is the weirdest thing to say. I'm 44 years old, and an episode of a dramedy on Apple TV made me bawl like a little bit ago. But it did. And here's the thing that gets me so much about this whole situation is that, you know, I love my parents. They're not perfect. They're incredibly imperfect, to be completely frank. But when it comes down to it, the effect that relationship ending had on me, I think really did more good than it did bad. As odd as that might sound, I don't know if it really sounds odd or not, but I think it really kind of helped to cement and kind of codify specifically what I didn't want in a relationship. And so I think that's kind of what it comes down to for me. Because I think necessarily it's not so much that my parents broke up and it hurt because I loved my parents so much, because that wasn't my experience. I didn't dislike my father. No, let me rephrase that. I always loved my father. My father is a good but flawed man. But I don't really particularly like him. And that's my issue. And so when I see representations of strong male figures in a parenting role, it affects me. And I know why. I've known this for decades at this point. I know why it affects me. Because I missed that, or I didn't feel that I had a strong enough version of that myself. And so when it came down to seeing the representation in this show of a dad who genuinely, cares and loves his son, and, obviously it's a show. This is all fictionalized. It's completely, fake. It just affects me differently because when you're talking about mass media like this, a TV show on a streaming network, you're talking about something that is, written by typically multiple people, and obviously goes through so many layers and rewrites and things of that nature to kind of hone it, and to make it as emotionally affecting as it can be, because that's the intention. That's the reason I watch that show, is because it's so well written, and so well done, and so well acted. But when it comes down to it, it's just so incredibly effective and affecting, because at the end of the day, I just really miss that portion of my life. My dad was always just kind of almost like a big brother to me more than a dad. He would try to kind of flex his dad muscle, so to speak, try to keep me in line or something when I was doing something he didn't want me to do, or when I was speaking out. I was a lippy little bastard. And I did it, a pretty fair amount, when it came down to pointing out hypocrisy. And it's still something I do to this day. If you know me on Facebook or anything, you know that. But here's the thing about it, and here's what would kind of affect me. While I didn't have a strong relationship with my father, what I did learn from him and seeing his and my mother's relationship was it gave me a really, really strong sensibility of what I wanted in a relationship for myself. Now, I'm not going to be the one to say my relationship with my wife is perfect. I don't think anything is truly perfect, but I think our relationship as a whole is closer to very good, to as close to perfect as you can get, than I think a lot of other people's. And I think the reason why is because One, we didn't have children. I think kids, as horrible as it's going to say, really, really harm relationships between, two adults. Obviously, I understand the whole, desire to propagate the species. Okay, fine, you breeders, you have at that, that's fine. But, it's about love, it's about understanding, it's about communication, and it's about respect. And those were things that, to varying degrees, didn't really exist in my parents' relationship and therefore affected me as a child. I'll give you a number of examples, but a big one for me was always just the willingness for my father to call my mom really, really nasty things. I don't want to curse on this channel. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's necessary. But you'd call her the C word. And he said it relatively often. And mind you, my father's not British. Let me establish that. That's a mean word. I don't like that word when it's used in a vitriolic, mean-spirited way. It can be used for comic effect brilliantly. Let me understand. Let me make sure that's abundantly clear. Funny ass word. Okay, kind of almost a curse word there, an ass, but whatever. You'll live. But when it comes down to it, here's the thing. You don't say something like that to someone you love. I've never been at a point of anger with my wife. Never. I've never been that angry where I would ever call my wife that word or anything remotely close to it. I won't do that because, one, I have enough respect for her where you just don't do certain things. I have a very, very strong moral compass when it comes to certain practices in my life. There's certain things you don't say. There's certain things you don't do. They were raised. They were beat into my head, not literally, figuratively. Understand, I was not abused. But in my head about how you treat people. You don't say certain things. You don't do certain things. You treat people with a certain level of respect at all times because you that's just what you do, and that's just how it is. And in my 44 years of living, I can count on one hand the amount of times where I've ever been truly angry with anybody to say horrible things like that. But then two, I would never, and I do mean never, say that to someone I love. Someone who I share a bed with, who I have the most intimate of relationships with, who I can be truly myself with, above and beyond anything else. The person who's seen me at my most vulnerable. That's the word I was looking at earlier. Vulnerable. I forgot the word. I got it. It took me 15, 18 minutes, whatever. But here's the thing. You don't say certain things. You don't do certain things to people. And this episode really kind of hammered that home. And that the effect that your wife, or ex-wife in this case for Ted, has is that he suddenly realizes that their relationship doesn't mean anything anymore. Suddenly what Rebecca says to him is, in a basic way, your relationship means nothing at this point with your wife. You have a son there. Go sing Hey Jude with him. That's the important thing. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. I really do. I think a lot of people are focused more on hurting the other person and getting revenge and vengeance. For what? Why? What's the point? What does that get you? What benefit does that provide? So if there's anything here that this little video, this confessional, this whatever the hell this is understand that the effect of your falling out of love with somebody will affect that child. It will affect them more than they even realize or recognize, perhaps. More than you ever will realize or recognize, I think, too. And understanding that when you decide to bring a child into this world, this cruel, filthy world, that there's a certain expectation that you have to do everything you can to protect that child, to love that child. And I think we all agree and understand, acknowledge those facts. But to understand that when you are bringing someone into the world, when you're in a toxic relationship, you're not doing anyone any level of service whatsoever. I don't know if that's food for thought. I think it kind of is, coming from, a childless 44-year-old weirdo. There's a bunch of X-Men stuff behind him. But at the end of the day, acknowledge your responsibility in shaping that person into the adult that they're going to be. Because ultimately, that is going to shape their relationships and their ability to function in the world. I'll say this to anybody who's going to listen, and I don't expect anyone to listen, so this is really more for me than anything else. But if your relationship with your partner, your spouse, your whomever, isn't great, and I'm going to use the word great, I'm going to ask you really truthfully, please be responsible and don't have a child. If you get into arguments all the time and somebody says hurtful things to you, don't have a child with them. Please don't. If somebody's abusing you verbally, emotionally, physically, don't have a child with them. Leave. Please leave. Find the strength within yourself to know that you're important, to know that you mean something, that you matter. Because I think so often what happens is, like any other human condition, that's all we're basically dealing with here, is that we all want to have a few basic needs met. And obviously, there's the big three, fire, shelter, water. We need those things to survive. And then above and beyond that, we have the more important ones, like I need to love someone. And love is so important. But not at your emotional, not at the cost of your emotional well-being. And certainly not at the cost of your children's. Understand that when you have a kid, they see everything. Nothing is missed. It's not. Just make sure that you are responsible. But we have to end a cycle. In the cycle of miserable, tortured, unstable, emotionally hurt people is something that we can change. We have to make a real valiant effort to do so, but we can do it. So I'm going to end it there. It's 25 minutes. I've been rambling here, but just think. Please think. And boy, that episode of Ted Lasso really did it for me. So that's that. But hopefully, if somebody ever watches this, they learn something. They take something away from this. If not, well, that's okay too. I mean, who the heck am I? So, have a good one. Thanks for your time, and take care.